Hello viewers, in this video I shall try to talk about postmodernism in English literature. According to scholars, postmodernism began in 1940 and it has continued up to 2000 year. So let's try to know in broad way. Though some have seen modernism ending by around 1939, with regard to English literature, when its modernism petered out and postmodernism began, has been contested almost as hotly as when the transition from Victorianism to modernism occurred. In fact, a number of modernists were still living and publishing in the 1950s and 1960s, including T.S. Eliot, Dorothy Richardson, and Ezra Pound. So here there are some debates about when postmodernism it began and when it ended. So that is a matter of debate. But after the postmodernism time too, many modernist writers were publishing their works, publishing their literary works. So that thing here it is saying, and among Ireland is furthermore Basil Bunting. He was born in 1901 and he had published little until Brick Flats in 1965, and Samuel Beckett, he was born in Ireland in 1906. So he had continued to produce significant works until the 1980s, though some view him as a postmodernist. So that is a little information about postmodernism. Now let's try to know more. Among British writers in the 1940s and 1950s were poets like Dylan Thomas. If you don't know, please try to research about him. Dylan Thomas and novelist Graham Greene, whose work spanned the 1930s and 1930s to the 1980s. And while Evelyn Waugh, W.H. Auden, they continued to publish until 1960s. Then what is postmodernism literature? Postmodern literature, it is both a continuation of the experimentation championed by writers of the modernist period, relying heavily, for example, on fragmentation, paradox, questionable narrators, etc., and a reaction against Enlightenment ideas implicit in modernist literature. Postmodern literature, like postmodernism as a whole, it is very difficult to define, and there is little agreement on the exact characteristics, scope, and importance of postmodern literature. Among postmodern writers are the Americans include Henry Miller, William S. Burroughs, Joseph Hiller, Kurt Vonnegut, if I'm not wrong, if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Hunter S. Thompson, Truman Capote, and Thomas Pynchon. If you talk about novel, then these two writers, they are known for their postmodernist works. Number one is George Orwell. I think you must have read his works like, what do you call it? Animal Farm and Aldous Huxley. So these two are a prominent figure in the postmodernist English literature. So if you don't know about these two characters or these two writers' biography and literary work, then you must know. Please research and please try to know. Many questions are asked related to their life and literary creations in the NET exam and many other entrance exam, even in some interviews if you have taken English literature as a part of that exam or journey. So in 1947, Malcolm Lowry, he had published Under the Volcano, while George Orwell's satire of totalitarianism, that is very famous book, 1984, that was published in 1949. So if you don't know, please read. And other novelists of this period and include writing in the 1950s and later were Anthony Powell, whose 12-volume cycle of novels, A Dance to the Music of Time, is a comic examination of movements and manners, power and passivity in English political, cultural, and military life in the mid-20th century. And then Nobel laureate William Golding's allegorical novel, Lord of the Flies, 1954, and it has also explored how culture created by man, it failed, using as an example a group of British schoolboys marooned on a deserted island. So please try to know about William Golding. Many questions are asked related to William Golding and his literary works, including Lord of Flies, that was published in 1954. Then philosopher Iris Murdoch. Philosopher Iris Murdoch, he was a prolific writer of novels throughout the second half of the 20th century, or the postmodernism age or period of English literature, and that deal especially with sexual relationship, morality, and the power of unconscious. Then another person of this time was Scottish writer who was also a well-known figure or the literature of this age, Muriel Spark. He had pushed the boundaries of realism in her novels. The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, that was published in 1961. At times, it takes the reader briefly into the distant future to see the various fates that befall its characters. Then Anthony Burgess, he is especially remembered for his dystopian novel called A Clockwork Orange, that was published in 1962. Then it is set in the not-too-distant future during the 1960s and 1970s. Paul Scott has also written his monumental series on the last decade of the British rule in India, called The Last Quarter, 1966 to 1975. It was the publication year. And Scotland, on the other hand, has in the late 20th century produced several important novelists, including the writer of How Late It Was, How Late, James Kelman, who, like Samuel Beckett, they have created humor out of the most grim situations, and Alcester Gray, whose Lanark, Life in 4 books, that was published in 1981. So it is also a dystopian fantasy set in surreal version of Glasgow called Unthanked. Then another two significant Irish novelists are John Benville, he was born in 1945, and Com Toybin, born in 1955. Then Martin Amis, born in 1949, Pat Baker, born in 1943, Ian McEwan, born in 1948, and Julius Barnes, born in 1946. So they are other prominent late 20th century British novelists. So if you talk about postmodernist drama, then an important cultural movement in the British theatre which developed in the late 1950s and early 1960s was kitchen sink realism or kitchen sink drama. So if you don't know what is kitchen sink drama, you have to know right away. Please go through it. Many questions are asked related to kitchen sink drama or kitchen sink realism. So it is a kind of term coined to describe art, novel, film, and television plays. And the term angry young man was often applied to a member of this artistic moment. So you have to know what is angry young man. Please go through it. And it is also used as a style of social realism, which depicts the domestic lives of the working class. And it has also tried to explore social issues and political issues. Then the drawing room plays of this post-war period, typical of dramatists like Terence Rattigan and Noel Coward, they were challenged in the 1950s by this angry young man in a place like John Osborne's Look Back in Anger that was published in 1956. So if you don't know who is John Osborne, you have to go through his works, his biography, and please go out to Look Back in Anger also, because many questions are often asked related to this play. And again, in 1950s, the absurdist play called Waiting for Godot. I think most of you are aware of it, and you must have read this thing in your bachelor degree and postgraduate degree also. So you have to know every detail about absurdist play. Please go through it, and you have to know also about Waiting for Godot that was published in 1955 by an Irish writer, Samuel Beckett. Profoundly affected British drama and the theatre of absurd. It was also influenced by Harold Pinter, born in 1930. The Bardi Party that was published in 1958, whose works are often characterized by menace or claustrophobia. Then Beckett has also influenced Tom Stoppard. If you don't know who is he, please go through his biography and later works. Many questions are asked related to him and his works. His famous works include Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead that was published in 1966. So this is also an example of absurd display. Then Tom Stoppard's works are, however, also notable for their high-spirited wit and the great range of intellectual issues which it tackles in different plays. Then an important new element in the world of British drama from the beginnings of radio in the 1920s was the commissioning of plays or the adaptation of existing plays like the BBC Radio. So if you don't know when BBC Radio was inaugurated, you have to get to know. You should know. Okay, many questions often asked. And this was especially important in the 1950s and 1960s and from the 1960s for television also, because many major British playwrights, in fact, either effectively began their careers with the BBC or had works adapted for radio, including Carol Churchill and Tom Stoppard, whose first professional production was in the 15 minutes just before midnight program on BBC Radio, which showcased new dramatists. And then John Mortimer made his radio debut as a dramatist in 1955 with his adaptation of his own novel like Man Betrayed for the BBC program, and other notable radio dramatists included Brendan Behan and novelist Angela Carter. If you don't know who is Angela Carter, you have to know not only about her life, you have to know what kind of work she had done and what kind of work she had done that had impacted English literature since its inception. Then, among the most famous work created for radio, these included Dylan Thomas' Under Milkwood that was published or premiered in 1954, Samuel Beckett's All That Fall in 1957, Harold Pinter's A Slight Act 1959, and Robert Bowles' A Man for All Season 1954. So if you talk about poetry, then postmodern poetry, it includes major poets like T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, and Dylan Thomas. They were still publishing in this period also after the modernism also. And though W.H. Auden's career began in the 1930s and 1940s, he had continued to published several volumes in the 1950s and 1960s. His stature in modern literature has been contested, but probably the most common critical view from the 1930s onward rank him as one of the three major 20th century British poets and heir to Yeats and Eliot. And new poets starting during the postmodernist later period include Philip Larkin. They had started their careers in the 1950s and 1960s. Philip Larkin, he had also created a literary poetry work include White Sun Weddings that was published in 1964. Then Ted Hughes, his famous work, The Hawk in the Rain, that was published in 1957. So whatever the name you have seen here, that all thing you have to do your own research when it was published, what kind of thing were there. So many questions are often prepared from these kind of topics. And Sylvia Plath, her famous work include The Colossus and The Irishman, Seamus Heaney, Death of a Naturalist, that was famous work. Then modern Ireland has also produced a number of other significant poets include Derek Mahon and Paul Muldoon, and in the 1960s and 1970s, Merchant poetry aimed to break the grip of the familiar by describing ordinary things in unfamiliar ways, as though, for example, Though the Eyes of Marcion. Besides poets most closely associated with it are Craig Raine and Christopher Reid. Another literary movement in this period was the British Poetry Revival. So if you don't know, please go through it. British Poetry Revival, it was a wide-reaching collection of groupings and subgroupings that embraces performance, sound, and concrete poetry. The Mersey Beat poets were Adrian Henry, Brian Pattern, and Roger McGough. So their work was a kind of self-conscious attempt at creating an English equivalent to the American beats. And other noteworthy later 20th century poets are Welshman R.S. Thomas, Geoffrey Hill, Charles Tomlinson, and Carol M. Duffy. Then Geoffrey Hill, he was born on 932. In 1932, he is considered one of the most distinguished English poets of his generation. And Charles Tomlinson, he was born in 1907. He is another important English poet of an older generation. Though since his first publication in 1951, he has built a career that has seen more notice in the international scene than in his native England. So if you talk about literature from the Commonwealth nation, then we will get a famous literator like Doris Lessing. She has also done many notable works in this time. So this all thing let me discuss here. Okay. So Doris Lessing, from the 1950 on, a significant number of major writers came from the countries that had over the centuries had been settled by the Britishers. Means from the British colony, many literary works were produced. And other than America, which had been producing significant writers from at least the Victorian period. And there had been, of course, been a few important works in English prior to 1950 from the British Empire. Then the South African writer Olive Schreiner's famous novel, The Story of an African Farm, was published in 1883. And New Zealanders Catherine Mansfield published her first collection of short stories, and in German Pension in 1911. The first major novelist writing in English from the Indian subcontinent was R.K. Narayan. I think you all are aware of him. If you don't know, please go to his biography and his literary works. Many questions must come. Okay, must come. And he had begun publishing in England in 1930s, thanks to the encouragement of English novelists like Graham Greene. Then Caribbean writer like Jean Rhys' writing career began as early as 1928, though her most famous work like Wild Sargasso Sea that was not published until 1966. So if you don't know who is Graham Greene, you please go through his biography and literary works, and please go through Wild Sargasso Sea. Then South Africa's Alan Patton's famous Cry, the Beloved Country. That's from 1948. These two you have to know. Please go through it. And then Doris Lessing from southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. She was a dominant presence in the English literary scene, frequently publishing from 1950 on throughout the 20th century, and she won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2007. Then another famous person is Salman Rushdie. I think most of you know about him. If you don't know, then please go through his biography and his literary works. Okay, then Salman Rushdie, he is another post-Second World War writers from the former British colonies who permanently settled in Britain. Rushdie had achieved fame with Midnight Children that was published in 1981. There is also a film adapted from this book. Please go through it. Please watch it if you have time, and please try to know what kind of things were portrayed in this movie and the book. And his most controversial novel, The Satanic Verse, that was published in 1989. It was inspired in part by the life of Muhammad. And then another person is literator is B.S. Naipaul. If you don't know, please go through his work and biography. He was born in Trinidad. He was another immigrant who wrote, among other things, A Band in the River in 1979, and he had also won Nobel Prize in Literature. Okay, then from Nigeria, a number of writers have achieved an international reputation for works in English, including novelist Chinua Achebe. If you don't know, please go through it. And he has also wrote many works in English, so you have to know his works. And then another famous person of this time was playwright Wole Soyinka. You have to know about him, please go through it. Then Soyinka had also won Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986, and so did South African novelists like Nadine Gardiner in 1995. Other South African writers in English are novelists like Jan Kodjisi. He had also won Nobel Prize in Literature in 2003, and playwright Athol Fugard, Kenya's most internationally renowned author is Ngugi Thiong'o, who has also, I must have pronounced wrong, I'm sorry, who has written novels, plays, and short stories in English. Then poet Derek Walcott from St. Lucia in the Caribbean. He has also another person who has won Nobel Prize in Literature in 1992. Then an Australian Patrick White, he is also a major novelist in this period, whose work was published in 1939 and won in 1973. Other noteworthy Australian writers at the end of this period was Les Murray and novelist Peter Carey. He was born in 1943, who is one of the only 4 writers who have won the Booker Prize twice. Then if we talk about major Canadian novelists, include Carol Seals, Lawrence Hill, Margaret Atwood. If you don't know whatever I'm saying here, whatever you have seen, that all thing you have to go through. And Alice Munro, Carol Seals' novel The Stone Diaries won the 1995 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, and another novel, Larry's Party, won the Orange Prize in 1998. Lawrence Hill, Book of Negroes, won the 2008 Commonwealth Writers' Prize, overall Best Book Prize, and Alice Munro became the first Canadian to win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2013. Munro also received the Man Booker Prize, International Prize in 2009. Among internationally known poets are Leonard Cohen and Annie Carson. Carson in 1996 won the Lennon Literary Award for Poetry, the Foundation Award for Poetry Fiction, and on to finish the moment. Then there is Agatha Christie. If you don't know about her, she had written many detective novels. Please go through it. Then she is J.K. Rowling. You must have seen his many movies. His works were adapted into movies like you must have heard that there is a Harry Potter series. You have to go through her and her works. Many questions are often asked. Then you will get many literary criticism done in this work in this time. Please go through that also. Okay. Then there are many writers who had won Nobel Prize. That all thing you have to got to know. Please go through it. Thank you so much for it.